Okay, well, I mean, I think we can get started. First of all, just thank you everybody for showing up. I know Hydro-Quebec is giving lots. They've even given up telling us when the power is coming back on. They've just said, yeah, everything's broken and everybody's working on it because the wind today has been particularly bad, particularly on the West Island. It would seem, judging by the number of blackouts we have. But really, thank you. I know it's been a busy week for a lot of us, and but I have to say, if anybody heard my comments in our first meeting, and I was sounding maybe a little less than optimistic, I just want to say that being part of these meetings and having these discussions has sort of really been helpful. So Maria's saying she can't see me. Is it my? Oh, you see? Okay, I'm getting a few chats that maybe you're looking at my the grill.
Yes.
There, Dash. You're looking. Okay, how's that? Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
I see a thumbs up. So again, I don't. Oh, I do get a picture of me. There we go. Good. I don't have to rely on my mirror anymore. So yeah, as I was saying, I came out of this last semester, the few weeks, a little shell shocked for on a number of reasons, and I haven't been feeling particularly optimistic about it. Although I have to say, these conversations and these discussions in this community is really over the last few days, these workshops have really been a great place for connecting and seeing that others are on the same wavelength, and it's being cautiously moving towards a more position of more optimism. The last two sort of sessions were a little bit more of a retrospective, like what happened. Let's take a look at what happened. What were the things that we did? What experiences did we have with the tools, and what worked and what didn't? This one I really wanted to, say, not ignore that, but start looking towards the fall and thinking, okay, this is the situation that we're in. A lot of us aren't happy about it. There are a lot of constraints that are being imposed by various levels of administration, on top of the natural difficulty that we'll have dealing with learning at a distance. On the other hand, we have time to prepare, and we're a bunch of creative people, and the situation does afford some interesting sort of perspectives, and may allow us to do a little bit of to rethink sort of the role and sort of the way the courses and our classes run. And we might, there may be some places that are interesting in which we could try a few changes that may work a little bit to our advantage. So that was a sort of idea that I'd had in mind. I was going to do a little bit of a longer lead in to it, but the notion when I think Chris had first suggested this sequence of workshops, the word flipped classroom came up, and this is something that I've had a little bit of experience with. And is this playing in this space that we're going to be able to do between what's a flipped classroom, blended classes, some of us may be going that way, or fully online. And I really did just want to take a minute to disambiguate those terms, because they often do get used sort of interchangeably at times, and they really do represent something different, although there are similarities. So so let's just start off and just my definition, and then if there aren't any objections once I've said them, maybe we could just adopt that for a working definition for today. When we talk about a flipped pedagogy, that's something in which you normally have that same sort of contact hours with the students. So you come into the classroom and just schedule time and you're with them, they're with you. However, what's changed is the sequencing of the elements of the pedagogical cycle, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But what you normally do is the typical sort of traditional script would involve, professor comes in at the front of the room, tells a lot of stuff to the students, maybe writes it on the board or shows PowerPoints, but the teacher is acting as the conduit of the information. It's a sort of a one-to-many transmissive mode. And then sort of the student putting it together happens outside of class as part of homework. So in a flipped pedagogy, you're actually sort of reverse that. The initial contact with the information comes as a form of either a reading assignment or a video, or there are many, many ways to structure that. But this is something that happens before the classroom as homework, before the class as homework. And then in class, you start using that time, instead of giving information, you have the students working collaboratively, usually, to actually sort of build on that knowledge that they work. So put it into practice, applying that knowledge, getting some feedback on it. And the difference, one of the really profound differences there is manifestly active learning in nature. You're working in a collaborative structure. The teacher is there acting as a support network, and you have that. So that would be the flip pedagogy. A blended model, and this is, they say there's sometimes some conflation of these ideas. A blended model is quite distinct in that you're actually cutting down on the amount of time in class. Whereas in flipped classroom, all you're doing is sort of rearranging what's homework and what's happening in class. In a blended context, you're actually removing class time and replacing it with online time. And that could still involve a lot of the same things that are happening in a flipped classroom, but now there is less face-to-face contact. What many of us are going to be facing, and we have been facing and will be facing, is actually the fully online version, where what you're doing is now you're actually moving, there is no face-to-face contact, and everything is done in this online space. So you can see how they're related. There's a lot, they tend to have, they all draw on our ability to have students do things outside of the class, usually involving some sort of online environment, be it flipped, blended, or a fully online course. What differs between them is the amount of time that you spend in class, and then what you're doing in those classes. And so something that sort of becoming apparent to me as I started to think about, rather than surviving last semester, I want to. I think Jim Slaughter was the one the other day who used the hierarchy: survive, strive, and thrive. I want to bring myself up at least into the strive strata, and so it occurred to me there's a great amount of flexibility now. We are online, but we have online in a way in which we do have access to sort of, it's not like an online correspondence course. We do have the ability to play with how the role of synchronous and the role of asynchronous instruction here. And the neat thing is, it's that's the divisions are going to be a lot less stark in terms of what's happening in class versus what's happening online. And this might afford us some opportunities here in order to play with our instructional designs for the fall. So so I'm just going to pause here for a second and just want to just open it up and see if there are any initial reactions to these thoughts before we sort of move into another discussion. So I don't know if it's a bit difficult for me to take a look at Okay, so there's a lot of things about my dash, and it's a lovely dash, but there we go. Yeah, I say it's hard for me to track the chat, so I don't know, Sue or Liz or somebody could
Yeah,
maybe.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna keep track of questions and hand raising, Michael, so that you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so any questions or comments so far? Well, I'm going to jump in. Sorry, I'm bad at reading the chat. Sorry. So, Hamad, you said so. Even flipped model is blended, but not every blended is flipped. Blended is more general. So, what do we all think about that statement?
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
there's also a comment about please elaborate on asynchronous. So, Michael, do you want to elaborate on what you mean by asynchronous, or does somebody else want to elaborate on what they mean by asynchronous?
Selma and Andrea raised their hands, so I think Selma went first.
Yeah, so I can talk. I can maybe address the idea of asynchronous. So when we're talking about synchronous classes, we're talking live, kind of like this session right here. So face to face, or some sort of like time-stamped interaction. Basically, that's everybody's working on the same or doing something collaboratively at the same time. So it doesn't have to be a Zoom thing. I consider, let's say, collaborative work on a different platform that doesn't involve video to be part of a live class, because I expect the students to be at the same time in that same virtual space. Where what the literature calls blended means that there's a mix of these live sessions and asynchronous, so that where the participants have to engage with the material, but at their own pace, at their own that time. Now the flipped model is becoming, I found a little like murky in the semester, because during the regular semester, it's pretty much as you explained, Mike, that it was just this taken away class time for students to engage with the material on their own, or something, or with whatever activity you want on their own in preparation for class. But I think there was some sort of misunderstanding, or something is happening with this online life or this online teaching mode that we're in, where that becomes a little complex, because we no longer understand whether that flipped model applies to a blended model of classes, or are we talking a separate a separate unit outside of the blended model. So for example, if I have my classes on Wednesday, I see my class twice a week, Wednesday and Friday, and Friday is always a live session, Wednesday is an asynchronous one, and if I give my students some flipped classroom model assignment to complete before class, do I put that in my Wednesday time, in my asynchronous time, or does it become a separate unit outside of that? And this is where I think a lot of it has happened that a lot of teachers sort of apply that flipped model as now adding like a third class time during a week, if you have like a twice a week meeting, and it became incredibly complex and daunting for students to now have to navigate synchronous classes, asynchronous classes, and a flipped something that they have to engage with. And it's also more work for the teacher, frankly. So I think the flipped model needs to be very well defined in this online world.
I'm just going to take a very quick second to just say, you really articulated beautifully what I'm, and I think much better than I did. But I'm in my car, so that's my excuse. But the notion that what's happening right now, because of the nature of what we're doing, flip sort of means, okay, we're not really changing the contact hours. We're not changing we're just sort of reordering elements of what's done outside of class and what's done in class. But now everything's done outside of class, so everything is a lot blurrier now. And I think if to my mind, I'm trying to sort of reconcile, well, okay, I've got to create an instructional design for next semester. I have a lot of constraints because I'm online, but this also affords a bit of a different the moment that we can take a look and maybe come up with something new, maybe fuse elements of all of these things, but coming up with a principled pedagogical design that respects the students, that respects the students' time, respects the teacher's time, and is as effective as it can be in an online only sort of environment. So, but that articulation is exactly what we'd. And I see some other things coming in the chat, but I think Sue was keeping a speakers list.
Yes, Andrea wants to say something as well, Andrea?
Yeah, but mine was not necessarily an answer to the questions that they were raised actually after I raised my hand. It was just maybe an idea, because I'm teaching math, and usually math was for me very traditional, and I didn't actually start to use a flipped classroom in my course because I thought that the students for math, I didn't have that much confidence of letting them go on their own and discover by themselves different concepts. But now that we have to teach online the whole semester, I feel more ready to start to actually go into that direction, because I think there is a need for that. What I wanted to point out is that for my class this semester, I gave all my classes synchronous, which means I went over the notes, over the questions, everything was like that. Then I realized by the end of the semester, and I think that would be a different approach for next semester, that I can use, an important distinction between synchronous and asynchronous would be that maybe I will feel more comfortable to leave the information transfer for the asynchronous and do I would say, the sense making, we say, for the synchronous part. So I think I would maybe not use all my synchronous meetings or sessions to transfer just the information, but maybe to use more into, sense making for students, where I'm there with them to not to clarify, but to make sense of the notions. This is what I just wanted to point out, that for me, it would be a new direction. I'm not sure if it's the good one if you are trying, but yeah, that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And
we have a few comments. We
Yep.
have a few comments in the chat that you might want to know about, Michael. There's
Okay.
a conversation happening about flipped classroom, and a little bit along the lines of what maybe Andrea started. And then there's also the question that Hamed raised about emotional engagement. So is there differences between synchronous and asynchronous instruction when it comes to emotional engagement?
I can speak actually a little bit on the few threads of literature of which I'm aware, but I haven't read deeply on that. And I know, though, that it's informing sort of Abbott's plans for next semester. So it was actually in the breakout room that I was in yesterday. So we ended up a little talking more about synchronous versus asynchronous time than what was the actual question that we were asked to talk about, but I think that it was sort of neat to hear the different perspectives on it. For context, John Abbott College, where I teach, they went very heavily synchronous in the expectations of the teachers. So we were asked to maintain from the start of online teaching through the end of semester at a minimum 60% of the contact hours actually being live synchronous sessions with our students. I actually maintained all of my classes as synchronous times, and that I think that was there. So the question now becomes, okay, for next semester, how do we want to do that, and what were the experiences of the other colleges? And there were some good things to say about some of the reports coming back from the other colleges as well. So I think Marianopolis, for instance, went exactly the opposite to us, and went completely asynchronous, so that it was no longer face-to-face meetings with the class. John Abbott is now looking at a model where in the first couple of weeks of the semester, in order to make that initial sort of emotional engagement with the students, and the students to make that engagement with the teacher, we're looking at basically full sessions for the first few weeks and a full sessions for the last few weeks of the course, and then maintaining a lower amount of as a minimum, a lower amount of synchronous activities, about 40% over the course of the semester, that weighted so that at the beginning of the semester, it's for the first few weeks it's synchronous. In the last few weeks, it's heavily synchronous, and in the middle you can back off a little bit. But this does go to some of the literature that they've read on these topics. So that emotional engagement is definitely there, and is definitely affecting at least the administration of my institution to suggesting particular sort of particular amounts of that. So that is one. I mean, how can I put it? It's even online, even with all of these constraints, is more interactive, and it's more there's something more happening when you're able to sort of have a back and forth, and even with all of the constraints. So that's there, but again, that may not be needed all the time. So so I'm seeing actually right down at the bottom, there's the somebody, is it Carolyn, has just mentioned something about a great book called Just-in-Time Teaching, and it's one that I picked up probably a decade ago, but it was very interesting, and they really got my mind working on that. When flipped classrooms became a thing, I recognized it as being that just-in-time teaching exactly. So, and there were, Liz, you'd mentioned another comment, and I'm sorry, I'm losing.
Yeah, no, it was the notion of flipped, I think, is one that may be provocative, because there were quite a few exchanges between was it Stephanie? I think Stephanie and others, where there was the conversation of, flipped classroom really depends on the teacher. If you can probably jump in, Stephanie, and correct me or add to this.
Right. So one of the concerns that I noticed when I was a teaching assistant for a graduate level course was that there was an issue with general student preparedness, and some of the comments that I had already responded to, and some of the others have mentioned there was some really nice ideas put out there, and my only concern was that in this particular instance, there was the teacher expected students to come in prepared in order to begin the class with small group activities, except that when, from what I could tell as a TA, that wasn't a big enough incentive to get students to participate. So the question was whether or not a more plenary style, a whole group style of discussion might have been more beneficial. And of course, if we're starting to talk about, for example, synchronous activities in a flipped classroom with synchronous discussions, that might be something that comes up in terms of student preparedness, student motivation. And so I guess one of the issues that I also mentioned was the idea that, you know, how do you motivate without kind of encouraging maybe not so healthy learning behavior, in the sense of always looking for an external reward, versus kind of that intrinsic community-oriented environment that we hope to have with our students, but that's not always there. So I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to any of those ideas.
Yeah, as an insight that was shared in a different Zoom call last week, right? We're having so many of these now. Or an idea, I guess, to put out there, that part of, I kind of tried to articulate it in the chat as well, that it's how do we tap into students' intrinsic motivation, right? We tend to think of how do we motivate students? How do we get student buy-in? And to kind of flip that and be like, well, what can we learn about students' motivations? What do students care about? And how can we tap into that and relate that to what we're doing to help create that need to know, if that makes sense.
Hi. Can I just interject, or should I have raised my hand?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation. I think one thing I'd like for us not to forget is that, okay, fine, some students will have lack of preparedness, even though we assume they did what we think they do but before coming into the classroom. So our assumption of their base of knowledge is probably we overestimate in some cases, and sometimes we underestimate how much the student knows. So I'd like for us not to cast aside the idea of that initial class discussion because a few people aren't prepared, because that lack of preparedness could actually make students go and have a eye-to-eye conversation of, did you read it? I didn't read it, so I can't learn from you. Oh, we both didn't read it? Okay, so like, for me, that actually makes the dynamic of a custom classroom where you go sit with people whom you think could learn from. And then you can see some group would be much, much bigger and some very small, and they might actually be catching up on that reading live. And I think that also allows for a nice dynamic in the classroom, compensating for that lack of preparedness. Sorry.
So, well, I think some very cool ideas are coming through, and some important perspectives. One of the things I'd like to do, I don't know, do we? What are I think we were in the 30s. Were we? It was getting it was getting up there. So
yeah, we're 50. We're about 50 people, Michael.
Oh,
So Sue's prepared the breakout rooms. If you would like us to maybe go into a breakout room,
yeah,
whenever you want, let us know. And in addition to that, we have, I put up slides. There's two slides, two things that Michael wants us to think about. One is just those notions, those three types of instruction. The flipped classroom, the flipped classroom, the blended learning, online instruction with the synchronous, asynchronous. That's one slide just as a reminder. And the second one is on the steps in a pedagogical design cycle that he wants us to think about.
yeah, so I think what I wanted, and I had actually prepared a nice slide, and I looked up and made sure I was using the right terms, and then, well, blackout and laptop dead, so I sort of had to the sort of discussion topic I'd want to have here is that let's just imagine, well, we don't have to imagine it. We are having to reimagine our courses. We're having to reimagine the way we're interacting with our students. What has happened this semester happened in a context with very little preparation, and we went into it. This time we have a whole summer to think about how we're going to do it. We know some of the constraints that we have. Others will undoubtedly pop up and get in our way. But given that there's going to be, from a technological side, much less of a divide in a regular semester, the synchronous and the asynchronous are very separate by the fact that synchronous is occurring everybody together in the same physical space. That's no longer the case. So the boundaries of, we have a little bit of stuff to play with here. And, can we think of ways that, it might just be a good exercise to think about what needs to be done synchronously, what is better to do asynchronously, and how do we sort of bundle up what we're going to do. So I put down, and you'll see these on the slides. I'm just going to read them off the little bit of paper that I winged this from. But just thinking of these steps here, prior knowledge activation. These are the steps that I sort of think about, probably in different terms. But when I'm designing, a module or a unit of my course. So I'm thinking about how I'm pulling down the students' prior knowledge and, sort of activating that. There's a knowledge seeking role where there's or knowledge acquisition, where the students are getting that acquisition, where they're getting that knowledge, or being exposed to these new ideas. Where's that coming from? There's the application and practice of these ideas. So particularly, I think in terms of physics, it's one thing to be able to quote the law of conservation of energy. It's another thing to be able to use that in an effective way. There's receiving feedback and incorporating that. And then there's also this notion of reflection and self-regulation that the students need to sort of work through. And all of these, and in a typical semester, I just to put it out there, I do basically what would be a flipped instructional model. But I'll have these assigned in various ways, but I'm now seeing a more room to play with, and I think it might be just an interesting exercise for all of us. And I've already in the comments that have gone through, it's like, oh, that's a kind of cool perspective. So I was thinking about doing that, and yesterday I found the time went really, really quickly in the breakout rooms, given the numbers. So I was thinking maybe let's do this, for 25 minutes, and come back about 4:30. Would that work for everyone?
Okay, so 25 minutes.
Might I suggest 20, because that way we'll work a little faster.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I've created 5 breakout rooms, 10 people each breakout room for 20 minutes. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Here we go.
So any means that allows that to take place is, for me, my emphasis for the starting of next year.
Shall I share something that someone had suggested? Yeah, for my fellow physicists. This is from Eugenia Atkina. Well, I guess it was her, but to do something personal, right? To do something personal from us, like even if it's showing a piece of our that's integrated into the curriculum. So like show them so in terms of we often will start with how do we generate possible hypotheses, possible explanations for some sort of
outside the class for them to study, right? Is that, do we agree on that?
Well, yeah, I guess that's the concept of the flipped classroom. The students learn the material first, and my understanding is that they learn the material first, and when they were coming to classrooms before the closure, when they were coming to the classroom was either to work on problems or on assignments in groups and so on. So during actually sitting in the classroom, they were not learning any theories, any concepts. They were applying. So that's what I was thinking in terms of the flipped classroom. What you can do it, the part of the classroom, whether it's physically present or online, that part is synchronous, if I understand.
But there's still learning happening outside.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, the theory.
Asynchronous, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's from the. Okay.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
Now, that is only one decision, one layer of the decision in my view. We flipped the content, right? Let's just leave it there. So what is the next decision then? What are we going to do in the class, right? So in the class, normally,
Hi, Liz, just saw your message.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to know how many people are not in breakout rooms. Ed, if you'd like to join us, I believe I was in a breakout room. Sue might have to put me back in. Julia, Yvette, if you would like to be in a breakout room. Sue, one of the things is, can you, I'm going to give you the message here in the chat. I hope it, we need to, some people in the breakout room didn't know what to do. So if you can let them know, because you're the only person who can let them know. I
took a tour. Okay.
Within the breakout rooms, you should be thinking of the following issues. And I'm going to continue. How might the your approach to online instruction be affected by the points Michael has made? And those are the points. If you could put that together, Sue, and send it to everybody, that would be great. And can you put me back in? Oh, I can go back. I'm in breakout room 2. So Ed, Yvette, if you want to join us in breakout room 2.
Breakout.
But I'm just curious what the reaction is going to be.
Okay, let me take that question. So when we've done it, we've used very simple activities that are
Hi, Ed.
You know, the advice we always give students is that they should treat their online class like a real class. And you should probably tell this to your students too. Schedule a block of time that you will sit down every week at the same time, and that is your chemistry class, that is your biology class, whatever. And that regularity kind
Was that really 20 minutes?
No, I'm sorry. I put 20, but I think it changed back to 10, which is the default, I guess. So I'm sorry about that.
Oh, Zoom, how you failed us.
The time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I saw you were having fun. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I mean, I can put you back. I can put you back in the breakout rooms. It's not a problem.
Just say, Sue, look, this is what we've been dealing with all semester. Like I think most of us here have done, we know exactly, no worries. It's,
yeah.
We're all in the same boat. Is everybody back, or is it just our group, or?
Yeah, everyone is back.
Oh, okay. So I mean, I guess the question, okay, I only see thing. So, yeah, there. Okay, so here, I can only, I don't know. So do you want to, it was a little bit faster than we'd anticipated, but do we want to share what was going on in the groups? Maybe, if we like, we can go back and do a little bit of a follow-up.
Stephen.
I think I could summarize our group discussion. The one clear point that seemed to come up is less experienced, less mature students are less able to come to class prepared. So to sort of start them slower, whereas more mature students might be able to, from the start, follow a bit more of a flipped model.
That's a really good point. I think that that's something that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that. And this is where I think Michael's point of those prior, those points that he brought up, knowing maybe it's maybe in more than steps of the cycle, as Michael was putting it, maybe there's sort of information that we need to know ahead of time. If we know something about our students, for instance, that their level of maturity when it comes to self-regulating behaviors, we can then provide a better, make a better decision as to the form that it takes, that our instruction can take. So I see this as a very valuable statement of, if my students are not able to handle asynchronous paced or self-paced instruction, I need to probably find a way of making sure that I do some of the synchronous teacher-paced type of instruction. So one of the things we've heard from our colleagues is something as simple as not having students know that when they do things asynchronously, so self-paced, they actually spend more time doing the exercises than we as teachers would have asked them to engage if we were there with them. So they try to complete things that we don't really want them to complete. We just want them to get the experience. We want them to dive into maybe a problem and start experimenting, applying equations and seeing if they can understand it, for instance. And we don't really care if they do the calculations, for instance. And yet they think they have to, so they're spending more time doing asynchronous work than they would be doing synchronous work. So that's one of the things that we've heard.
And I think on that point, I'll just jump in on the workload that the students found themselves under. I know my classes were commenting on the expanded nature of basically all of the work that they were expected to complete from their other classes, and in fact prompting me to actually scale back my very structured flipped instructional models in order to give them a little bit more time, because there was an exhaustion factor. And that one came up actually in our discussion in our breakout room, just how tired we were at the end of a class. Imagine students having to sit through 3 or 4 of those classes in a day, and it is a bit more having these sort of online very sort of narrow things. It's not the same as being in a group of people, and I find it, and I don't think I'm alone there in feeling that that's a lot more taxing. And so if it's taxing on us, it's also taxing on the students. And then they have these other activities to do. And as Liz is just saying, they don't understand, we only really wanted you to do a third of what you had done. You interpreted it as needing to finish this entire exercise when we only meant you to sort of get a start on it and bring it to class. And being a little bit, how could I say, there were issues around that sort of structure where we can correct things in real time where we're not able to as effectively in an online space. I think will have to be part of the designs that we're building. I'm certainly aware of it.
Ed has his hand raised. Ed?
Yeah, hi. It's funny, one of the big selling points which people talk about flipping classrooms, just supposing that you've got a bunch of videos or resources, for example, you've made online, then which the students then have the ability to access, 7, 8, 10 times. What I've found during the semester is that ability to do that becomes a perceived obligation to do that. So a class which you might be doing synchronously for, I don't know, call it an hour, then takes up 3 hours of the student's time asynchronously because they feel like they have to. This comes back to this idea of not knowing when to leave good enough alone, right? Like this sort of completionist attitude of having to turn every pebble over, which they wouldn't do in a synchronous class because there simply isn't the time for that. And so sometimes it's sort of synchronous content is part of workload management for both them and us. And because it becomes very easy. I found the same thing with asynchronous testing, that I'd put up something and say you have 24 hours to submit this, but it should only take you 90 minutes. But then of course they expect perfection. It will take them 5 or 6 hours, when had I given it synchronously, they would have out of necessity only taken 90 minutes to do the same thing, right?
Can I say something? I have no experience teaching online. I was on sabbatical. I watched my colleagues try to finish the semester. And I've been wanting to flip my class for the longest time. By the way, I'm Meral Gülkurt. I'm a professor of business technology management at JMSB. I'm very excited to flip the class. I'm prepared for it. I'm excited about it. What seems very overwhelming to me is how do I manage the engagement inside the class when I'm in the class, but when not all the students are in the class, because we are told that there will be students who are in different time zones who may not be able to attend. So there's so many emotional issues. Yes, self-regulation and the maintaining that is a serious issue, but activities, there are different layers of decisions that we need to make. Another one that I need to deal with is, while I'm doing all of this, they work in teams. I don't know if anybody else has that kind of experience, but I'm thinking that if I can actually have breakout rooms for them to work in teams and I visit them, maybe that's how I can engage them when we are in the class.
Are you meaning you're working on Microsoft Teams?
No, with Zoom.
With Zoom, okay.
Yeah, I am also attending MS Teams seminars, and also there's a working group at Concordia. I'm participating in that, still in the process of making a decision. But so far it seems most people say the breakout rooms in Zoom are working, so it should be okay. And rather than introduce another platform that they need to work on, I would rather use the one that we have if it has the capabilities. Flipping the class, I would like to hear more about the challenges of actually flipping the class. Not about any other layer though. Just with that, if I was to put the material, make it available to them before class for them to learn, what should I be careful about? What should I be warned about? Because I haven't done that before.
Chris, you want to say something?
Yeah, Meryl, I'd been using Zoom and doing the breakout rooms myself, and maybe your mileage might vary, and maybe other people can pipe up too. But I found the breakout rooms were very difficult to navigate in the sense that when I did break my students out into the rooms, I couldn't see what they were doing unless I'm in the room. And that's how it works. So if you do join the room to see what they're doing, give them feedback and stuff, the thing is you can no longer see what anyone else is doing. So you lose sight of what's happening in all the breakout rooms unless you're actually inside of them. If you've already got established a rhythm with your students where they work autonomously, that can perhaps be okay. When they can't, it does give them space to do group work without interruption. Just that if you're relying on it to be a place where you can see them doing work and give them intensive feedback, it's perhaps suboptimal. But if it's for breaking them out into do group work and they can do work autonomously, it'll probably work pretty well.
Thank you.
Ed also had his hand raised, but Chris, did you have another thing to say? Something else?
No.
Andrea, sorry, I see.
I put it back down because my point had been covered. Thanks, Liz.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I can say that I use the breakout rooms in Zoom, as Chris was saying, but I would like to maybe look into something else for the fall, just because I would like them to have a place where they can work in groups outside of my Zoom meeting. That's the problem, that in Zoom, yes, I can ask them, but how do they work? Like, a big challenge would be that for this semester, I know most of my students. We did 8 weeks together, so I knew a little bit something about them, but now they're going to be completely new. Of course, at Dawson, we have 35, 40 students. We can manage to kind of know them. It's not like Concordia where you have 100 students. That's not actually maybe a goal. I'm not sure, but for us would be a goal to actually know the students and see their advancement in the course. So I'm thinking more to attend some of the description or introduction on the Microsoft Teams, because I think for the fall, I think I'm going to look into that, because that gives them, if you create a Microsoft team with your course, it would give them a platform to actually chat and to work on it, even if I'm not there, outside of our scheduled activities. So that's something that I wanted to share.
Can I add something here, Michael? I think Andrea raises a really critical point, and it sort of goes back to the conversations we've been having, you know, all the 3 days. Having a place for the students to be, to meet, to you know, there are a couple of components in that. One of them is what I think many of you are talking about, which is that emotional engagement. I think yesterday Jim talked about having a sense of place to be, a place to gather. And we know from our research that having some kind of collective space that has some kind of persistence is also an important thing for students. Because they can't meet face-to-face right now, having that space that you talked about, Andrea, I think becomes even more important, because the Zoom, what's really nice is that we've all been experiencing Zoom both as participants as well as students in the last 3 days. You know, we're experiencing what it's like to be in a breakout room where you have to introduce yourselves. The instructions aren't completely clear. How do you find the information that the teacher wanted you to work on? You know, introducing ourselves to each other. All of those things are things that we never would have experienced if we didn't have these last 3 days. And I think I've learned a lot about, you know, what it's like to be the student. But coming back to the point of what Andrea is making is that chat disappears the moment the Zoom is finished. Well, the teacher can share it, but it's just a text, you know, a text file. There isn't that sense that you have when you leave a class where you feel like you've worked on something and you're taking it back with you, and the person that you were with is taking back the same thing. Especially for those of us who've been teaching have been lucky enough to teach at Dawson, where you've got lots of these active learning spaces that are very rich. So we are entering a very, again, Jim said it, it's sensory deprivation. You know, it's a very different kind of experience that we have and what our students are having. And I think, you know, this is something that it's not just technology that's going to fix it, because we can find many different solutions. And I think the comment that Microsoft Teams might help, but I don't think we should look for technology to be the thing. I think we should look to say, what are our needs? Like, what do we feel viscerally that we need to be in these spaces, and then put the demand out there. Tell our administration, this is what we need. Tell our, you know, the people like SALTISE, tell us what you need, because then we could go be your advocate. We could go to these technology spaces and tell them, you guys need to fix this. But first we need to know, what is it you feel? What is it that you feel is lacking? Don't look at it as, it may not exist. In other words, we may have to build those things to make them feel less of this sensory deprivation that I feel we all feel.
Chris, your comment came just for me. There you go.
I was thinking that I've been using breakout rooms. I'm thinking to continue to do it in physics at Dawson, but I'm thinking also on what something Michael said before, to change from the beginning, the end, and the middle of the semester, to change the momentum. And eventually, instead of having breakout rooms where I'm not able to see in all the rooms at the same time, to eventually divide my lecture time in different parts, and eventually to meet with 8 or 10 students, and they know in advance, and I will have more time, and I will ask them all to be involved at that time, only for half an hour, because to push them to really participate more in smaller groups, but to be always there with them, because otherwise some will just hide. So I'm just trying to think about something different.
That's a really good point. I mean, I'm sure Michael is trying to get to his buttons of speaker, so I'm going to answer.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to answer, but no, I think I mean, what you're saying there in terms of the is a term that we've used in our research a little bit, situational awareness. And when you're working in those wonderful rooms at Dawson, and to a lesser extent, we've concocted a few at John Abbott as well, and others have them, where you're in the class and you're having them work in groups, and if you're able to get them working on these big either smart boards at Dawson, or if you have boards around the room, the neat thing about that is there's a lot of information that's being carried to the teacher, and also between the groups as to how things are going and how things are that is a lot more difficult. I mean, in teams, we do have these sort of persistent spaces and sort of these persistent groups and these persistent artifacts within those spaces. But when you actually are sort of in that synchronous mode where you're having them work together, as a teacher, I'm sort of completely blind to what's going on, except for the group, and that I choose to join. And I haven't found a satisfactory way of doing that, except if you're working on a shared document, you can maybe see, join that document and see how the groups are sort of moving through it. But it is a definite challenge in the online space, where it just sort of happens in a well-designed room, and it happens without you even really being aware of it. But you just see where everybody is, and okay, this activity is derailing. I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to pull the class back in together. Carolyn just put I just see it's coming across a team. It doesn't have breakout rooms, but it has channels, and you can send your you can create sort of permanent channels, sub channels, in which that's what we were using to have breakout sessions. So the students would click into the channel in which they were, and then they start a meeting within there. And then I could come along and join any of them and give them guidance. But it's not, I had 10 teams, 10 channels that I had to go through, and people at the end had been, the last group to be seen had been working for a long time without having any sort of guidance, unless they specifically asked for it, and kind of called me over. So yeah, you can use channels is basically one way of enabling a breakout room function in Teams.
I would have a question quickly. I'm wondering if that problem hasn't been resolved somewhere else, in terms of, I'm always thinking of the Cégep à distance approach there, or any kind of equivalent model that does the Cégep à distance. I mean, I guess we're not the only ones, or it's not the first time that online teaching has been going on. So I'm wondering if maybe they already had solved that aspect of interaction with the teacher, because it seems to me that whether we're talking about active learning or flipped classrooms, it's going to fall apart if there is not any kind of interaction, live interaction with a teacher, or with a little group of students or something like that. And we've been talking about, either breakout rooms or channels and teams, and we have to go there and check and so on. And that seems to be a good compromise. But I'm wondering if out there, like other institution or Cégep à distance, like if they already had found maybe tools or solutions to that problem.
That's an excellent question, Rajan, that if no one here has an answer or has experience, Ed has his hand raised, so maybe he has an answer. But if no one does and you want us to explore that more, I'm happy for us at SALTISE to find out more information about it.
Yeah, this is, I wish this were an answer, but it's maybe just a comment that adds to the problem. The one, you know, like this, we've heard a lot of parallels this term to looking to Cégep à distance, for example, or to other already online courses, platforms, whatever you want to call them. The big difference there is that those would select for both students and teachers who already had the motivation to join an asynchronous or online platform. And so what we, you know, in our situation, what we need are things which are almost more bomb-proof, because neither students nor, let's be frank, most of us are in this situation by choice. Right? So you know, we really need a higher degree of enticement and user friendliness than someone like Cégep à distance, which is already somewhat selecting for highly motivated or for enthusiastic participants would have.
Yeah, I think Michael just jumped in as well. I think Ed raises a really important point. None of us are ready for, I mean, in fact, a lot of the writing that, the early writing in articles was, they were making a clear distinction, and there was a very important article written early on that said, we should not be judging this as online instruction, because it was emergency remote teaching. And I think that is something that they were warning us ahead of time, that we shouldn't base success or failure of online instruction with this experience. Michael, go ahead and add.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I think that, you know, Ed really, you know, that was a really important point there, that you're really dealing with a different student population at Cégep à distance, but that doesn't stop us from, you know, taking a look at what they, you know, how they've approached those problems. And yeah, it might not be a perfect fit, but it might be better than what we have now, right? That it might offer, you'll give us a more in our toolkit. And I think that was a very good observation, though.
We have Stephen, and then we have Michael Coltrane.
Yeah, there's something I did want to share with this community. So yesterday, one thing I got out of it, besides the nice community, was the idea of Loom. So I'd never heard of that. And today I had literally 15 minutes before this, I joined Loom and made my video, and then came to this. And actually my video that I made was, I think yesterday we talked about sharing kind of our best ideas or whatever. And so I made a 2-minute video that does that, and it actually has to do with today's theme. It's reflective writing. So I don't know, I could share it in the whatchamacallit, in the chat, I guess. Is that useful? I think it's here.
Yes, absolutely. That would be great.
So I don't know, is it worth, since we're all together, it's 2 minutes. Pretty much what I would say, but now I don't have to say it.
Sure. Let's, Stu, do you want to try it and broadcast? Or do you want me to do it?
Or Stephen?
So yeah, I'd have to share screen, right?
Yeah, you are allowed to share screen if you want.
Oh, sure then. I will do that.
While Stephen is getting up to speed, Michael, maybe you can, did you want to add something to the question, or do you want to wait for after?
Sure, I'll just quickly, it's a very quick point. I just want to echo what you were saying, actually, that it's the right way to approach this, that this is not your typical e-learning situation. This is an emergency response to a particular situation. And we do have to keep that in mind, because I work at eConcordia, and the way we get over a lot of these problems that a lot of the professors have been discussing about intimacy and talking with your students and those interactions, the relationships, is that we have like a large teaching staff that is working on each course. There's the professor, but then sometimes there's as many as 4 or 5 or even 6 TAs working directly under them who have their own smaller groups that allow for those relationships and interactions to happen. And I don't think a lot of the professors are going to be getting that kind of support in the fall. So it is a pretty big issue, I think, in those terms, because that's how we typically address it.
That's a great, that's really great to know, because clearly that's probably the answer from Cégep à Distance as well. And it's not going to be our situation in the fall. So Stephen's video.
Yeah, so you'll see I'm wearing the same shirt, so it just happened.
So I'd like to share how I do reflective writing in my class. I've been doing it for quite a while, and basically what I have now is this. Before the class where we're going to learn some new material, I send them an article to read, and they do so. And then they have to submit a document afterwards, about 150 to 300 words, which does 3 things. Summarize the article in their own words, elaborate on the article in as creative and personal way they like, and finally describe anything they didn't understand in the article and try to ask specific questions they want answers to. And if everything was well understood, instead describe what you find most interesting about the topic. So these 3 things, each of them serve an important purpose. The first one is just to integrate, is to consolidate what they learned. So it's for themselves, it's for the student. The second one is to have them form a personal connection to it, but also so that I can respond to number 2. So it helps me make a one-on-one connection with the student. Finally, 3 is really what's focused on in class. So when we start off in class, I put them in groups, they talk about what they didn't understand, and they try and resolve it. And then we come all together as a group, a whole class, and go over the things that were most commonly misunderstood. As far as what to read, I like things that are not too rigorous. So since we're introducing content, I like casual writing, like pop sci type stuff. So I've actually spent many years writing such articles, and so I give them articles I've written because they're targeting physics at Cégep level. So here's an example of some mechanics ones that I give in a given semester. And then in terms of grading these, secret between me and you, I don't look at the first thing, so I don't look at their summaries, especially if I'm short on time, which I often am. What I do is I look at their what they find interesting in their elaborations that are personal, and I comment on those. That's where our personal connection comes in. And I take note of any questions they have, especially those that come up often. The whole process takes about 2 minutes per student. So it's roughly a 2-hour commitment in a given week, but I find it really valuable. That's it. Hope you enjoy.
So as you see, that's what one take does for you. I followed Chris's advice and did not seek perfection.
Can you control where your little face bubble hovers?
I didn't get that far. I literally, I recorded it and then it was 3:30 and I came here.
Nice. The answer is yes, you can. And in fact, you can move it around as easily while you're it's like FaceTime and your little window. You can move it around anywhere you want in situ while you're recording. So we have Ahmed, and we have 10 minutes left, Michael. So Ahmed, you want to talk?
Hi, yeah. Speaking to what Stephen showed, I also have the very similar follow-up on a reading or a lecture. And because one of the previous discussions was student engagement and also having that sense of emotional engagement or a community feeling. This is a very good way of starting your class. So one other thing that I have actually 4 questions, almost identical to what Stephen has, but the 4th question that I have, somewhat related to his 2nd question, is about writing, creative writing. And usually I encourage them to make it funny, so something humorous from the lesson. And I take that up, I go through them very quickly. And first of all, it's fun to read for me, and I also make a little selection. And I start every class with that selection, let's say 5 or 6 of them. I just broadcast that to the students and go through that. Sometimes if there's a common mistake, I explain the mistake. Sometimes if it's insightful, I explain how it's insightful. I am going to share with you a selection of these things. This is from economics. I teach economics. So you can see from every lesson, I've picked 1. You can see some of them are funny. Sometimes they sexualize it, which is also fine to me. But as a means of getting, and I make it anonymous, but it's also always it's kind of like a competition for them to make it to the list that's going to be shown to the class. So if you want to have that kind of community feeling to start the class, I think it's a very effective way of starting a conversation.
Well, I guess one thing I would add is I make a point to tell them that I will not read anything but their questions to the rest of the class, so that they know that anything else they write is safe and as though they were talking to me in confidence.
Well, just gonna, we've got just a few minutes left, and I just wanted to, bring it back around. I mean, it's sort of been the theme. I think we've all got, this week, that we, have something in mind, and the conversation goes in sort of different directions. And I think this is very fruitful, and I think that's sort of a wonderful open opportunity. And I want to thank you, Stephen, and Ahmed. Sorry, I can't pull back on the names for just sharing those practices that you're talking about. Just does anybody want to speak to this notion, though? We've talked about sort of that emotional engagement with the students, and I think that being facilitated within the context of a synchronous sort of session at the end. But are there any other parts of teaching that need to be synchronous, or are there things that we can maybe be a little bit more split between synchronous and asynchronous? And I was just wondering if anybody had any thoughts on that in the last few minutes.
If no one's jumping forward, there will and just interrupt me if you're just slow on the pushing of the button. I think what we're experiencing is 2 things. One of them is this is not only an overwhelming experience for all of us, but we don't even know where to start. So I want to go back a little bit to something I believe was Helen who said she's thinking about breaking up the rhythm. I know I'm paraphrasing you, Helen, of the regular class script. So to me, Michael, to go back to your original question or sort of topic of flipped, blended, online, like what is it? Because it's now all distant. We are away from our students no matter what modality we choose. I think maybe Helen's approach is maybe more like it. It's not these sort of bimodal or binary type of options anymore. It is, we're going to use all of them And in fact, we're going to find ways of, making it at the scale of a human scale. So whatever we do, we will, if we were to continue this for the next 5 years, we probably will start seeing some beautiful patterns that would emerge, and we would be able to say, this is what this kind of online instruction looks like. But likely we won't have this for many years. We probably will have it for, if in the worst case scenario, 1.5 years. But that won't give us enough time to see these beautiful patterns emerge. But I think Helen's approach is not to put a definitive yes or no. It is, I'm going to use all of these things, all of the tools available to me, both being synchronous as well as asynchronous. I'm going to be using some flipped classroom, whatever that means. I think if we take away the word flipped, what we mean is preparing for the time that we're with you. So we prepare for the time that I'm with the students. They prepare with the time what they're going to be with me. And that's what we're really trying to do, is to just accommodate those kinds of different kinds of moments when we're together, and time, and we are aware and we are conscious of how to design the ones when we're not with them. And I think those notions that we talked about, not overwhelming our students, not recognizing that they need more instruction, not instruction. So more instructions about how to do things, like don't go beyond 20 minutes because I just intend you to play with these ideas. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to spend some time on. And eventually, I know that the most important thing that would be is the sharing, like what Stephen did, what Hamad did. I know those are really important. So SALTISE is really, really delighted to find a place on our website to put those resources so that people can just figure out and play with them. And they're not serious. No one's trying to make great, theater here, not cinema. We're not going to win any awards. But I think we will give each other that little bit of a hand that I think we all need right now, which is, how do I do this tomorrow?
Well, I think that's that about sums it up beautifully, Liz. And say just my thanks to SALTISE for all the help and resources that I was able to pull this semester, and getting us through this the last few weeks. And I am going to be really pulling on that website over the summer to get ready for the fall. Where my clock in my car, which isn't GPS, is telling me it's 5 o'clock. So I don't. I will just say thank you everybody for attending, and thank you for your patience. Really, again, sorry for the technical difficulties. The Hydro-Quebec will hopefully hopefully.
Thank you, Michael. You deserve a round of applause. This is amazing. That talk about race under fire. Yeah, wonderful.
One thing I would say, during my master in education, I was told it's important to surprise the students.
Well, maybe that's what this tells us, is that Michael is the quintessential teacher who can raise the level of surprise.
You should try doing that deliberately someday, Michael.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful summer. We'll keep on sending information, and send us your stuff. Yes.
Perhaps just letting them know that we are making the videos, the recordings of the webinars available on our Facebook page. So yes, SALTISE has a Facebook page, by the way. If you don't know, I'm going to put in the chat so you can go there and like the page.
Fantastic.
So is it accessible to people who aren't on Facebook?
Great.
Yes, it is. If you don't have an account, you can still access the video.
Hooray. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't know that answer. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. Be safe and enjoy the, I just saw the my flash of news, not good news. 100 Dow Jones just went down 1,800 points today, which is the result of the COVID. Apparently, COVID reports are high. So take a breath.
What? Are you saying COVID's bad?
Michael,
so,
drive safely, sir.
Yeah, so yeah, be safe and stay in touch, and thank you, and thanks Michael, thanks to the SALTISE team, Sue, Lorraine, thank you all, and just take a sigh. Yeah, have a nice summer. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Liz.
Lorraine, Sue, thank you very
Bye. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.